A Child's Dream of a Star by Charles Dickens. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Child's Dream of a Star. There was once a child, and he strolled about a good deal, and thought of a number of things. He had a sister, who was a child too, and his constant companion. These two used to wander all day long. They wondered at the beauty of the flowers. They wondered at the height and blueness of the sky. They wondered at the depth of the bright water. They wondered at the goodness and the power of God who made the lovely world. They used to say to one another sometimes, "Supposing all the children upon the earth were to die, would the flowers and the water and the sky be sorry?" They believed they would be sorry. "For," said they, "the buds are the children of the flowers, and the little playful streams that gambol down the hillsides are the children of the water, and the smallest bright specks playing at hide and seek in the sky all night must surely be the children of the stars, and they all would be grieved to see their playmates, the children of men, no more." There was one clear shining star that used to come out in the sky before the rest, near the church spire above graves, that was larger and more beautiful, they thought, than all the others, and every night they watched for it, standing hand in hand at the window. Whoever saw it first cried out, "I see the star," and often cried out both together, knowing so well when it would rise and where. So they grew to be such friends with it that before lying down in their beds they always looked out once again to bid it good night, and when they were turning round to sleep they used to say, "God bless the star." But while she was still very young, oh, very, very young, the sister drooped, and came to be so weak that she could no longer stand in the window at night. And then the child looked sadly out by himself, and when he saw the star, turned round and said to the patient pale face on the bed, "I see the star." And then a smile would come upon the face, and the little weak voice used to say, "God bless my brother and the star." And so the time came, all too soon, when the child looked out alone, and when there was no face on the bed, and when there was a little grave among the graves, not there before, and when the star made long rays down towards him as he saw it through his tears. Now these rays were so bright, and they seemed to make such a shining way from the earth to heaven, that when the child went to his solitary bed, he dreamed about the star, and dreamed that lying where he was, he saw a train of people taken up that sparkling road by angels. And the star, opening, showed him a great world of light, where many more such angels waited to receive them. All these angels who were waiting turned their beaming eyes upon the people who were carried up into the star, and some came out from the long rows in which they stood, and fell upon the people's necks, and kissed them tenderly, and went away with them down avenues of light, and were so happy in their company that lying in his bed he wept for joy. But there were many angels who did not go with them, and among them one he knew. The patient face that once had lain upon the bed was glorified and radiant, but his heart found out his sister among all the lost. His sister's angel lingered near the entrance of the star, and said to the leader among those who had brought the people thither, "Is my brother come?" And he said, "No." She was turning hopefully away when the child stretched out his arms and cried, "Oh, sister, I am here, take me." And then she turned her beaming eyes upon him, and it was night, and the star was shining into the room, making long rays down towards him, as he saw it through his tears. From that hour forth, the child looked out upon the star as on the home he was to go to, when his time should come, and he thought that he did not belong to the earth alone, but to the star too, because of his sister's angel gone before. There was a baby born to be a brother to the child, and while he was so little that he never yet had spoken word, he stretched his tiny form out on his bed and died. Again the children dreamed of the opened star, and of the company of angels, and the train of people, and the rows of angels, with their beaming eyes all turned upon those people's faces. Said his sister's angel to the leader, "Is my brother come?" And he said, "Not that one, but another." As the child beheld his brother's angel in her arms, he cried, "Oh, sister, I am here, take me." And she turned and smiled upon him, and the star was shining. He grew to be a young man, and was busy at his books, when an old servant came to him and said, "Thy mother is no more. I bring her blessing on her darling son." Again, at night he saw the star, and all that former company. Said his sister's angel to the leader, "Is my brother come?" And he said, "Thy mother." A mighty cry of joy went forth through all the star, because the mother was reunited to her two children. And he stretched out his arms and cried, "O mother, sister, and brother, I am here, take me." And they answered him, "Not yet." And the star was shining. He grew to be a man whose hair was turning grey, and he was sitting in his chair by the fireside, heavy with grief, and with his face bedewed with tears, when the star opened once again. Said his sister's angel to the leader, "Is my brother come?" And he said, "Nay, but his maiden daughter." And the man who had been the child saw his daughter, newly lost to him, a celestial creature among those three, and he said, "My daughter's head is on my sister's bosom, and her arm is round my mother's neck, and at her feet there is the baby of old time, and I can bear the parting from her. God be praised." And the star was shining. Thus the child came to be an old man, and his once smooth face was wrinkled, and his steps were slow and feeble, and his back was bent. And one night, as he lay upon his bed, his children standing round, he cried, as he had cried so long ago, "I see the star." They whispered one another, "He is dying." And he said, "I am. My age is falling from me like a garment, and I move towards the star as a child. And oh, my Father, now I thank thee that it has so often opened to receive those dear ones who await me." And the star was shining, and it shines upon his grave. End of A Child's Dream of a Star by Charles Dickens. Read by Theo from Hebersham.
How do you find this book? Any thoughts about the book or the author? Any suggestion for improvement? Please take a moment to share your thoughts in a comment. If you like it, share it with your friends who might enjoy it as well. Subscribe to keep in touch. Visit CompleteAudiobooks.com for more quality content.
Brabo and the Giant by William Elliot Griffis. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lisa Rubio, San Rafael, California, 2015. Ages ago, when the giants were numerous on the earth, there lived a big fellow named Antigonus. That was not what his mother called him, but someone told him of a Greek general of that time, so he took this for his own. He was rough and cruel. His castle was right on the Scheldt River where the city of Antwerp now stands. Many ships sailed out of France and Holland down the stream. They were loaded with timber, flax, iron, cheese, fish, bread, linen, and other things made in the country. It was by this trade that many merchants grew rich and their children had plenty of toys to play with. The river was very grand, deep and wide. The captains of the ships liked to sail on it because there was no danger from rocks and the country through which it flowed was so pretty. So every day one could see hundreds of white-sailed crafts moving towards the sea or coming in from the ocean. Boys and girls came down to stand in their wooden shoes on the banks to see the vessels moving to and fro. The incoming ships brought sugar, wine, oranges, lemons, olives, and other good things to eat, and wool to make warm clothes. Often craftsmen came from the wonderful countries in the south to tell of the rich cities there, and to help build new and fine houses and splendid churches and town halls. So all the Belgian people were happy. But one day this wicked giant came into the country to stop the ships and make them pay him money. He reared a strong castle on the river banks. It had 4 sides and high walls, and deep down in the earth were dark, damp dungeons. One had to light a candle to find his way to the horrid places. What was it all for, the people wondered, but they soon found out. The giant, with a big knotted club made out of an oak tree, strode through the town. He cried out to all the people to assemble in a great open square. "From this day forth," he roared, "no ship, whether up or down the river, shall pass by this place without my permission. Every captain must pay me toll in money or goods. Whoever refuses shall have both his hands cut off and thrown into the river. Hear ye all and obey. Anyone caught in helping a ship go by without paying toll, whether it be night or whether it be day, shall have his thumbs cut off and put in the dark dungeon for a month. Again I say, obey." With this the giant swung and twirled his club aloft and then brought it down on a poor countryman's cart, smashing it into flinders. This was done to show his strength. So every day when the ships hove in sight, they were hailed from the giant's castle and made to pay a heavy toll. Poor or rich, they had to hand over their money. If any captain refused, he was brought ashore and made to kneel before a block and place one hand upon the other. Then the giant swung his axe and cut off both hands and flung them into the river. If a ship master hesitated because he had no money, he was cast into the dungeon until his friends paid his ransom. Soon, on account of this, the city got a bad name. The captains from France kept in and the shipmen from Spain kept out. The merchants found their trade dwindling and they grew poorer every day. So some of them slipped out of the city and tried to get the ships to sail in the night and silently pass the giant's castle.
But the giant's watchers on the towers were as wide awake as owls and greedy as hawks.
They pounced on the ship captains, chopped off their hands, and tossed them into the river. The townspeople who were found on board were thrown into dungeons and had their thumbs cut off. So the prosperity of the city was destroyed, for the foreign merchants were afraid to send their ships into the giant's country. The reputation of the city grew worse. It was nicknamed by the Germans Handwerpen, or hand-throwing, while the Dutchmen called it Antwerp, which meant the same thing. The Duke of Brabant, or Lord of the Land, came to the big fellow's fortress and told him to stop. He even shook his fist under the giant's huge nose and threatened to attack his castle and burn it. But Antigonus only snapped his fingers and laughed at him. He made his castle still stronger and kept on hailing ships, throwing some of the crew into dungeons and cutting off the hands of the captains until the fish in the river grew fat. Now there was a brave young fellow named Brabo who lived in the province of Brabant. He was proud of his country and her flag of yellow, black, and red, and was loyal to his lord. He studied the castle well and saw a window where he could climb up into the giant's chamber. Going to the Duke, Brabo promised if his lord's soldiers would storm the gates of the giant's castle, he would seek out and fight the ruffian. While they battered down the gates, he would climb the walls. "He's nothing but a bullywhack, a bully and a boaster," said Brabo, "and we ought to call him that instead of Antagonist." The Duke agreed. On a dark night, 1,000 of his best men-at-arms were marched with their banners, but with no drums or trumpets or anything that could make noise and alarm the watchmen. Reaching a wood full of big trees near the castle, they waited till after midnight. All the dogs in the town and country for 5 miles around were seized and put into barns so as not to bark and wake the giant up. They were given plenty to eat, so they quickly fell asleep and were perfectly quiet. At the given signal, hundreds of men holding the ship's masts or tree trunks marched against the gates. They punched and pounded and at last smashed the iron-bound timbers and rushed in. After overcoming the garrison, they lighted candles, and unlocking the dungeons, they went down and set the poor, half-starved captives free. Some of them, pale, haggard, and thin as hop poles, could hardly stand. About the same time, the barn doors where the dogs had been kept were thrown open, and in a full cry, the regiment of the animals, from puppies to hounds, were at once out, barking, baying, yelping, as if they knew what was going on and wanted to see the fun. But where was the giant? None of the captains could find him. Not one of the prisoners or the garrison could tell where he had hid. But Brabo knew that the big fellow, Antigonus, was not at all brave, but really only a bully and a coward. So the lad was not afraid. Some of his comrades outside helped him set up a tall ladder against the wall. Then, while all the watchers and men-at-arms inside had gone away to defend the gates, Brabo climbed into the castle through a slit in the thick wall. This had been cut out like a window for the bow and arrow men, and was usually occupied by a sentinel. Sword in hand, Brabo made for the giant's own room. Glaring at the youth, the big fellow seized his club and brought it down with such force that it went through the wooden floor. But Brabo dodged the blow and, in a trice, made a sweep with his sword, cutting off the giant's head, and he threw it out the window. It had hardly touched the ground before the dogs arrived. One of the largest of these ran away with the trophy, and the big, hairy noddle of the bully was never found again. But the giant's huge hands, they were cut off by Brabo, who stood on the very top of the highest tower, while all below looked up and cheered. Brabo laid one big hand on top of the other, as the giant used to do when he cut off the hands of the captains. He took first the right hand, and then the left hand, and threw them, one at a time, into the river. A pretty sight now revealed the fact that the people knew what was going on, and were proud of Brabo's valor. In a moment every house in Antwerp showed lighted candles, and the city was illuminated. Issuing from the gates came a company of maidens. They were dressed in white, but their leader was robed in yellow, red, and black, the colors of the Brabant flag. They all sang in chorus the praises of Brabo, their hero. "Let us now drop the term of disgrace to the city, that of hand-throwing, and give it a new name," said one of the leading men of Antwerp. "No," said the chief ruler. "Let us rather keep the name, and more than ever invite all peaceful ships to come again. Antwerp at the wharf, as of old. Then let the arms of Antwerp be 2 red hands above a castle." "Agreed!" cried the citizens with a great shout. The Duke of Brabant approved and gave new privileges to the city on account of Brabo's bravery. But from high to low all rejoiced to honor their hero, who was richly rewarded. After this, thousands of ships from many countries loaded or unloaded their cargoes on the wharves or sailed peacefully by. Antwerp excelled all seaports and became very rich again. Her people loved their native city so dearly, and they coined the proverb, "All the world is a ring, and Antwerp is the pearl set on it." To this day, the great square rises the splendid bronze monument of Bravo the Brave. The headless and handless hulk of the giant Antigonus lies sprawling, while on his body rests Antwerp Castle. Standing over all at the top is Brabo high in the air. He holds one of the hands of Antigonus, which he is about to toss into the Scheldt River. No people honor valor more than the Belgians. Themselves are today, as of old, among the bravest. End of Brabo and the Giant by William Elliot Griffis.
The Caliph and the Gardener, from 50 Famous People, a book of short stories by James Baldwin. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Dale Grothman. The Caliph and the Gardener by James Baldwin. There was once a Caliph of Cordova, whose name was Al-Mansur. One day a strange merchant came to him with some diamonds and pearls, which he had brought from beyond the sea. The Caliph was so pleased with these jewels that he bought them, and paid the merchant a large sum of money. The merchant put the gold in a bag of purple silk which he tied to his belt underneath his long cloak. Then he set out on foot to walk to another city. It was midsummer, and the day was very hot. As the merchant was walking along, he came to a river that flowed gently between green and shady banks. He was hot and covered with dust. No one was near. Very few people ever came that way. Why should he not cool himself in the refreshing water? He took off his clothes and laid them on the bank. He put the bag of money on top of them and leapt into the water. How cool and delicious it was! Suddenly he heard a rustling noise behind him. He turned quickly and saw an eagle rising into the air with his money bag in its claws. No doubt the bird had mistaken the purple silk for something good to eat. The merchant shouted. He jumped out of the water and shouted again. But it was no use. The great bird was high in the air and flying toward the far-off mountains with all his money. The poor man could do nothing but dress himself and go sorrowing on his way. A year passed by, and then the merchant appeared once more before Al-Mansur. "O Caliph," he said, "here are a few jewels which I had reserved as a present for my wife, but I have met with such bad luck that I am forced to sell them. I pray that you will look at them and take them at your own price." Al-Mansur noticed that the merchant was very sad and downcast. "Why, what has happened to you?" he asked. "Have you been sick?" Then the merchant told him how the eagle had flown off with his money. "Why didn't you come to us before?" he asked. "We might have done something to help you. Toward what place was the eagle flying when you last saw it?" "It was flying toward the Black Mountains," answered the merchant. The next morning the Caliph called 10 of his officers before him. "Ride at once to the Black Mountains," he said. "Find all the old men that live on the mountains or in the flat country around, and command them to appear before me 1 week from today." The officers did as they were bidden. On the day appointed, 40 gray-bearded, honest old men stood before the Caliph. All were asked the same question: "Do you know of any person who was once poor, but who has lately and suddenly become well-to-do?" Most of the old men answered that they did not know of any such person. A few said that there was one man in their neighborhood who seemed to have had some sort of good luck. This man was a gardener. A year before, he was so poor that he had scarcely clothes for his back. His children were crying for food. But lately, everything had changed for him. Both he and his family dressed well. They had plenty to eat, and he had even bought a horse to help him carry his produce to market. The Caliph at once gave orders for the gardener to be brought before him the next day. He also ordered that the merchant should come at the same time. Before noon the next day, the gardener was admitted to the palace. As soon as he entered the hall, the Caliph went to meet him. "Good friend," he said, If you should find something that we had lost, what would you do with it?" The gardener put his hands under his cloak and drew out the very bag that the merchant had lost. "Here it is, my lord," he said. At the sight of his lost treasure, the merchant began to dance and shout for joy. "Tell us," said Al-Mansur to the gardener, "tell us how you came to find that bag." The gardener answered, "A year ago I was spading in my garden. I saw something fall at the foot of a palm tree. I ran to pick it up, and was surprised to find that it was a bag full of bright gold pieces. I said to myself, 'This money must belong to our master Al-Mansur. Some large bird has stolen it from his palace.'" "Well then," said the Caliph, "why did you not return it to us at once?" "It was this way," said the gardener. "I looked at the gold pieces, and then thought of my own great necessities. My wife and children were suffering for want of food and clothing. I had no shoes for my feet, no coat for my back. So I said to myself, 'My lord Al-Mansur is famous for his kindness to the poor. He will not care.' So I took 10 gold pieces from the many that were in the bag. I meant only to borrow them, and I put the bag in a safe place, saying that as soon as I could replace the 10 pieces, I would return all to my lord Al-Mansur. With much hard labor and careful management, I have saved only 5 little silver pieces. But as I came to your palace this morning, I kept saying to myself, when our lord Al-Mansur learns just how it was that I borrowed the gold, I have no doubt that in his kindness of heart he will forgive me the debt." Great was the Caliph's surprise when he heard the poor man's story. He took the bag of money and handed it to the merchant. "Take the bag and count the money that is in it," he said. "If anything is lacking, I will pay it to you." The merchant did as he was told. "There is nothing lacking," he said, "but the 10 pieces he has told you about, and I will give him those as a reward." "No," said Al-Mansur, "it is for me to reward the man as he deserves." Saying this, he ordered that 10 gold pieces be given to the merchant in the place of those that were lacking. Then he rewarded the gardener with 10 more pieces for his honesty. "Your debt is paid. Think no more about it," he said. End of The Caliph and the Gardener by James Baldwin.
Edith's Tea Party by Lois Walters. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Edith's Tea Party. Edith was a little girl who was just learning to write. Her mother told her one day that she could have a tea party on the next Tuesday, if the weather was fine, and that she could invite her little friend Helen, who lived on the same street, though not very far away. But she must write the letter to ask Helen to come. So Edith got up at her mother's writing desk and took some of her own writing paper and began to write. She could make the letters, but she could not spell very well. She asked her mother how to spell the words, and then she wrote them down. And this is the letter she wrote. Dear Helen, Mamma says I may ask you to come to my tea party next Tuesday at 4 o'clock. Bring your dolly. Your loving friend, Edith. Then she sealed the letter in the envelope and put a stamp on it and stood on the front piazza so as to give it to the postman herself. When Tuesday came, Edith's nurse dressed her in a fresh white frock, and Edith dressed her dolly in her best dress, and went out under the tree where her nurse had set the table for 2. And then she sat in a chair at the table and waited. But the big town clock struck 4, and no Helen came. And then she waited for half an hour longer. Then Edith put her dolly down on the chair and went in the house to find her mother. Mamma, she said, I think Helen is very rude. She doesn't come to my party, and I invited her. Just wait a little longer, dear, said her mother, and she will come. Maybe her nurse was busy dressing Helen's little sister and brother and couldn't get her ready in time. "But I invited her," was all Edith could say. "But I invited her, and she doesn't come." Then her mother went to the telephone and called up Helen's mother. In a moment she came back. "Edith, dear," she said, "what day did you write Helen to come?" Her mother said she thought it was to be Thursday, and so did Helen, and this is only Tuesday. "But I did say Tuesday, mamma," said Edith, who was almost ready to cry. "I remember because that was the hardest word to spell, and I think I made a blot when I wrote it." "Well, never mind, dear. Helen is getting ready now, and will be over in a few minutes," said her mamma. And Edith was very happy, and ran out to the tea-table under the trees with her doll to wait. But she did not have to wait very long this time, for in a little while Helen came running across the lawn carrying her doll, and so happy were both little girls that Edith forgot all about the long time she had been waiting for Helen to come. Helen wanted Edith to know that she had not been rude in staying away, so she brought with her the letter Edith had sent her, so she could show it to Edith. And there, sure enough, the word Tuesday was written so badly that it looked more like Thursday, and that was why Helen did not think she was expected on this day. Well, the very first thing they did was to undress their dolls and put them to sleep under one of the bushes on the lawn, in the shade, so that the sun would not hurt their eyes, and so that the wax would not be melted from their cheeks. Edith put her napkin over both dolls for a comforter, for you never know when it will blow up cold, and little girls have to be careful of their dolls, as their own mothers are. Very soon the maid came out with cookies and lady-fingers and make-believe tea, and another napkin to take the place of the one Edith had put over the dolls, and they had tea. Then the two little girls and Edith's nurse had a nice game of croquet, and they had a lovely tea-party after all, and Edith forgot all about waiting so long for Helen to come. But Edith never again made a mistake when she spelled Tuesday. End of Edith's Tea Party by Lois Walters.
The Elves and the Shoemaker. From Grimm's Fairy Tales by the Brothers Grimm, translated by Edgar Taylor and Marion Edwards. Narrated by Mary Jane Conlon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Elves and the Shoemaker. There was once a shoemaker who worked very hard and was very honest, but still he could not earn enough to live upon, and at last all he had in the world was gone, save just leather enough to make one pair of shoes. Then he cut his leather out, all ready to make up the next day, meaning to rise early in the morning to his work. His conscience was clear and his heart light amidst all his troubles, so he went peaceably to bed, left all his cares to heaven, and soon fell asleep. In the morning, after he had said his prayers, he sat himself down to his work, when, to his great wonder, there stood the shoes, all ready-made, upon the table. The good man knew not what to say or think at such an odd thing happening. He looked at the workmanship. There was not one false stitch in the whole job. All was so neat and true that it was quite a masterpiece. The same day a customer came in, and the shoes suited him so well that he willingly paid a price higher than usual for them. And the poor shoemaker, with the money, bought leather enough to make 2 pairs more. In the evening he cut out the work and went to bed early, that he might get up and begin betimes next day. But he was saved all the trouble, for when he got up in the morning, the work was done, ready to his hand. Soon in came buyers who paid him handsomely for his goods, so that he bought leather enough for 4 pair more. He cut out the work again overnight, and found it done in the morning, as before. And so it went on for some time. What was got ready in the evening was always done by daybreak, and the good man soon became thriving and well off again. One evening, about Christmas time, as he and his wife were sitting over the fire chatting together, he said to her, "I should like to sit up and watch tonight, that we may see who it is that comes and does my work for me." The wife liked the thought, so they left a light burning and hid themselves in a corner of the room behind a curtain that was hung up there, and watched what would happen. As soon as it was midnight, there came in 2 little naked dwarfs, and they sat themselves upon the shoemaker's bench, took up all the work that was cut out, and began to ply with their little fingers, stitching and rapping and tapping away at such a rate that the shoemaker was all wonder, and could not take his eyes off them. And on they went, till the job was quite done, and the shoes stood ready for use upon the table. This was long before daybreak, and then they bustled away as quick as lightning. The next day the wife said to the shoemaker, "These little wights have made us rich, and we ought to be thankful to them, and do them a good turn if we can. I am quite sorry to see them run about as they do, and indeed it is not very decent, for they have nothing upon their backs to keep off the cold. I'll tell you what, I will make each of them a shirt, and a coat and waistcoat, and a pair of pantaloons into the bargain, and do you make each of them a little pair of shoes." The thought pleased the good cobbler very much, and one evening, when all the things were ready, they laid them on the table instead of the work that they used to cut out, and then went and hid themselves to watch what the little elves would do. About midnight, in they came, dancing and skipping, hopped round the room, and then went to sit down to their work as usual. But when they saw the clothes lying for them, they laughed and chuckled, and seemed mightily delighted. Then they dressed themselves in the twinkling of an eye, and danced and capered and sprang about as merry as could be, till at last they danced out at the door and away over the green. The good couple saw them no more, but everything went well with them from that time forward, as long as they lived. This has been The Elves and the Shoemaker, from Grimm's Fairy Tales, by the Brothers Grimm, translated by Edgar Taylor and Marion Edwards, narrated by Mary Jane Conlon.
The Emperor's New Clothes by Hans Christian Andersen. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Lin Li. Many years ago, there was an emperor who was so excessively fond of new clothes that he spent all his money in dress. He did not trouble himself in the least about his soldiers, nor did he care to go either to the theatre or the chase, except for the opportunities then afforded him for displaying his new clothes. He had a different suit for each hour of the day, and as of any other king or emperor, one is accustomed to say, "He is sitting in council." It was always said of him, "The emperor is sitting in his wardrobe." Time passed merrily in the large town which was his capital. Strangers arrived every day at the court. One day 2 rogues, calling themselves weavers, made their appearance. They gave out that they knew how to weave stuffs of the most beautiful colors and elaborate patterns, the clothes manufactured from which should have the wonderful property of remaining invisible to everyone who was unfit for the office he held, or who was extraordinarily simple in character. These must, indeed, be splendid clothes, thought the emperor. Had I such a suit, I might at once find out what men in my realms are unfit for their office, and also be able to distinguish the wise from the foolish. This stuff must be woven for me immediately." And he caused large sums of money to be given to both the weavers in order that they might begin their work directly. So the two pretended weavers set up 2 looms, and affected to work very busily, though in reality they did nothing at all. They asked for the most delicate silk and the purest gold thread, put both into their own knapsacks, and then continued their pretended work at the empty looms until late at night. "I should like to know how the weavers are getting on with my cloth," said the emperor to himself, after some little time had elapsed. He was, however, rather embarrassed when he remembered that a simpleton, or one unfit for his office, would be unable to see the manufacture. To be sure, he thought he had nothing to risk in his own person, but yet he would prefer sending somebody else to bring him intelligence about the weavers and their work before he troubled himself in the affair. All the people throughout the city had heard of the wonderful property the cloth was to possess, and all were anxious to learn how wise or how ignorant their neighbors might prove to be. "I will send my faithful old minister to the weavers," said the emperor at last, after some deliberation. "He will be best able to see how the cloth looks, for he is a man of sense, and no one can be more suitable for his office than he is." So the faithful old minister went into the hall, where the knaves were working with all their might at their empty looms. "What can be the meaning of this?" thought the old man, opening his eyes very wide. "I cannot discover the least bit of thread on the looms." However, he did not express his thoughts aloud. The impostors requested him very courteously to be so good as to come nearer their looms, and then asked him whether the design pleased him, and whether the colors were not very beautiful, at the same time pointing to the empty frames. The poor old minister looked and looked. He could not discover anything on the looms, for a very good reason, viz., there was nothing there. "What?" thought he again. "Is it possible that I am a simpleton? I have never thought so myself, and no one must know it now if I am so. Can it be that I am unfit for my office? No, that must not be said either. I will never confess that I could not see the stuff." "Well, sir minister," said one of the knaves, still pretending to work, "you do not say whether the stuff pleases you." "Oh, it is excellent," replied the old minister, looking at the loom through his spectacles. "This pattern and the colors, yes. I will tell the emperor without delay how very beautiful I think them." "We shall be much obliged to you," said the impostors. And then they named the different colors and described the pattern of the pretended stuff. The old minister listened attentively to their words, in order that he might repeat them to the emperor, and then the knaves asked for more silk and gold, saying that it was necessary to complete what they had begun. However, they put all that was given them into their knapsacks, and continued to work with as much apparent diligence as before at their empty looms. The emperor now sent another officer of his court to see how the men were getting on, and to ascertain whether the cloth would soon be ready. It was just the same with this gentleman as with the minister. He surveyed the looms on all sides, but could see nothing at all but the empty frames. "Does not the stuff appear as beautiful to you as it did to my lord the minister?" asked the impostors of the emperor's second ambassador, at the same time making the same gestures as before, and talking of the design and colors which were not there. "I certainly am not stupid," thought the messenger. "It must be that I am not fit for my good, profitable office. That is very odd. However, no one shall know anything about it." And accordingly he praised the stuff he could not see, and declared that he was delighted with both colors and patterns. "Indeed, please your imperial majesty," said he to his sovereign when he returned, The cloth which the weavers are preparing is extraordinarily magnificent." The whole city was talking of the splendid cloth which the emperor had ordered to be woven at his own expense. And now the emperor himself wished to see the costly manufacture, while it was still in the loom. Accompanied by a select number of officers of the court, among whom were the 2 honest men who had already admired the cloth, he went to the crafty impostors, who, as soon as they were aware of the emperor's approach, went on working more diligently than ever, although they still did not pass a single thread through the looms. "Is not the work absolutely magnificent?" said the 2 officers of the crown already mentioned. "If your majesty will only be pleased to look at it, what a splendid design, what glorious colours!" And at the same time they pointed to the empty frames, for they imagined that everyone else could see this exquisite piece of workmanship. "How is this?" said the emperor to himself. "I can see nothing. This is indeed a terrible affair. Am I a simpleton, or am I unfit to be an emperor? That would be the worst thing that could happen. Oh, the cloth is charming," said he aloud. "It has my complete approbation." And he smiled most graciously and looked closely at the empty looms, for on no account would he say that he could not see what 2 of the officers of his court had praised so much. All his retinue now strained their eyes, hoping to discover something on the looms, but they could see no more than the others. Nevertheless, they all exclaimed, "Oh, how beautiful!" and advised his majesty to have some new clothes made from this splendid material for the approaching procession. "Magnificent! Charming! Excellent!" resounded on all sides, and everyone was uncommonly gay. The emperor shared in the general satisfaction, and presented the impostors with the riband of an order of knighthood, to be worn in their buttonholes, and the title of gentlemen weavers. The rogues sat up the whole of the night before the day on which the procession was to take place, and had 16 lights burning, so that everyone might see how anxious they were to finish the emperor's new suit. They pretended to roll the cloth off the looms, cut the air with their scissors, and sewed with needles without any thread in them. "See," cried they, at last, "the emperor's new clothes are ready." And now the emperor, with all the grandees of his court, came to the weavers, and the rogues raised their arms as if in the act of holding something up, saying, "Here are your majesty's trousers, here is the scarf, here is the mantle." The whole suit is as light as a cobweb. One might fancy one has nothing at all on, when dressed in it. That, however, is the great virtue of this delicate cloth. "Yes, indeed," said all the courtiers, although not one of them could see anything of this exquisite manufacture. "If your imperial majesty will be graciously pleased to take off your clothes, we will fit on the new suit," in front of the looking-glass. The emperor was accordingly undressed, and the rogues pretended to array him in his new suit, the emperor turning round from side to side before the looking-glass. "How splendid his majesty looks in his new clothes, and how well they fit!" everyone cried out. "What a design! What colours! These are indeed royal robes." "The canopy which is to be borne over your majesty in the procession is waiting," announced the chief master of the ceremonies. "I am quite ready," answered the emperor. "Do my new clothes fit well?" asked he, turning himself round again before the looking-glass in order that he might appear to be examining his handsome suit. The lords of the bedchamber, who were to carry his majesty's train, felt about on the ground, as if they were lifting up the ends of the mantle, and pretended to be carrying something, for they would by no means betray anything like simplicity or unfitness for their office. So now the emperor walked under his high canopy in the midst of the procession, through the streets of his capital, and all the people standing by and those at the windows cried out, "Oh, how beautiful are our emperor's new clothes! What a magnificent train there is to the mantle, and how gracefully the scarf hangs!" In short, no one would allow that he could not see these much admired clothes, because in doing so he would have declared himself either a simpleton or unfit for his office. Certainly, none of the emperor's various suits had ever made so great an impression as these invisible ones. "But the emperor has nothing at all on," said a little child. "Listen to the voice of innocence," exclaimed his father. And what the child had said was whispered from one to another. "But he has nothing at all on," at last cried out all the people. The emperor was vexed, for he knew that the people were right, but he thought the procession must go on now. And the lords of the bedchamber took greater pains than ever to appear holding up a train, although in reality there was no train to hold. End of The Emperor's New Clothes by Hans Christian Andersen.
The Ghost Who Was Afraid of Being Bagged, from Folk Tales of Bengal, by the Reverend Lal Bahari Dey. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Dale Grothman. The Ghost Who Was Afraid of Being Bagged, from Folk Tales of Bengal, by Lal Bahari Dey. Once upon a time there lived a barber who had a wife. They did not live happily together, as the wife always complained that she had not enough to eat. Many were the curtain lectures which were inflicted upon the poor barber. The wife used often to say to her mate, "If you had not the means to support a wife, why did you marry me? People who do not have means ought not to indulge in the luxury of a wife. When I was in my father's house I had plenty to eat, but it seems that I have come to your house to fast. Widows only fast. I have become a widow in your lifetime." She was not content with mere words. She got very angry one day and struck her husband with the broomstick of the house. Stung with shame, and abhorring himself on account of his wife's reproach and beating, he left his house with the implements of his craft, and vowed never to return and see his wife's face again until he had become rich. He went from village to village, and towards nightfall came to the outskirts of a forest. He lay himself down at the foot of a tree, and spent many sad hours in bemoaning his hard lot. It so chanced that the tree, at the foot of which the barber was lying down, was dwelt in by a ghost. The ghost, seeing a human being at the foot of the tree, naturally thought of destroying him. With this intention the ghost alighted from the tree, and with outspread arms and a gaping mouth stood like a tall palmyra tree before the barber and said, "Now, barber, I am going to destroy you. Who will protect you?" The barber, though quaking in every limb through fear, and his hair standing erect, did not lose his presence of mind, but with that promptitude and shrewdness which are characteristics of his fraternity, replied, "Oh, spirit, you will destroy me. Wait a bit, and I'll show you how many ghosts I have captured this very night and put into my bag, and right glad I am to find you here, as I shall have one more ghost in my bag." So saying, the barber produced from his bag a small looking-glass, which he always carried about with him, along with his razors, his whetstone, his strop, and other utensils, to enable his customers to see whether their beards had been well shaved or not. He stood up, placed the looking-glass right against the face of the ghost, and said, "Here you see one ghost which I have seized and bagged. I am going to put you in the bag to keep this ghost company." The ghost, seeing his own face in the looking-glass, was convinced of the truth of what the barber had said, and was filled with fear. He said to the barber, "Oh, sir barber, I'll do whatever you bid me, only do not put me into your bag. I will give you whatever you want." The barber said, "You ghosts are a faithless set. There is no trusting you. You will promise, and not give what you promise." "Oh, sir," replied the ghost, "be merciful to me. I'll bring to you whatever you order, and if I do not bring it, then put me into your bag." "Very well," said the barber. "Bring me just now 1,000 gold mohurs, and by tomorrow night you must raise a granary in my house and fill it with paddy. Go and get the gold mohurs immediately, and if you fail to do my bidding, you will certainly be put into my bag." The ghost gladly consented to the conditions. He went away, and in the course of a short time returned with a bag containing 1,000 gold mohurs. The barber was delighted beyond measure at the sight of the gold mohurs. Then he told the ghost to see to it that by the following night the granary was erected in his house and filled with paddy. It was during the small hours of the morning that the barber, loaded with the heavy treasure, knocked at the door of his house. His wife, who reproached herself for having in a fit of rage struck her husband with a broomstick, got out of bed and unbolted the door. Her surprise was great when she saw her husband pour out of the bag a glittering heap of gold mohurs. The next night the poor devil, through fear of being bagged, raised a large granary in the barber's house, and spent the livelong night in carrying on his back large packages of paddy till the granary was filled up to the brim. The uncle of this terrified ghost, seeing his worthy nephew carrying on his back loads of paddy, asked what was the matter. The ghost related what had happened, and the uncle ghost said, "You fool! You think the barber can bag you? The barber is a cunning fellow. He has cheated you, like a simpleton as you are." "You doubt," said the nephew ghost, "the power of the barber? Come and see." The uncle ghost then went to the barber's house and peeped in through the window. The barber, perceiving from the blast of wind which the arrival of the ghost had produced that a ghost was at the window, placed full before it the self-same looking-glass, saying, "Come now, I'll put you also into the bag." The uncle ghost, seeing his own face in the looking-glass, got quite frightened, and promised that very night to raise another granary, and to fill it, not this time with paddy, but with rice. So in 2 nights the barber became a rich man, and lived happily with his wife, begetting sons and daughters. Thus my story endeth. The naiad thorn withereth. Why, O naiad thorn, dost wither? Why does thy cow on me browse? Why, O cow, dost thou browse? Why does the neatherd not tend me? Why, O neatherd, dost not tend the cow? Why does the daughter-in-law not give me rice? Why, O daughter-in-law, dost not give rice? Why does my child cry? Why, O child, dost thou cry? Why does the ant bite me? Why, O ant, dost thou bite? Coot, coot, coot. The end of the ghost who was afraid of being bagged, from the folk tales of the Bengali, by Lal Bahari Day. The Landlord's Mistake, from 50 Famous People, a book of short stories by James Baldwin. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Dale Grothman. The Landlord's Mistake by James Baldwin. When John Adams was president and Thomas Jefferson was vice president of the United States, there was not a railroad in all the world. People did not travel very much. There were no broad, smooth highways as there are now. The roads were crooked and muddy and rough. If a man was obliged to go from one city to another, he often rode on horseback. Instead of a trunk for his clothing, he carried a pair of saddlebags. Instead of sitting at his ease in a parlor car, he went jolting along through the mud and mire, exposed to wind and weather. One day some men were sitting by the door of a hotel in Baltimore. As they looked down the street, they saw a horseman coming. He was riding very slowly, and both he and his horse were bespattered with mud. "Here comes old Farmer Mossback," said one of the men, laughing. He's just in from the backwoods." "He seems to have had a hard time of it," said another. "I wonder where he'll put up for the night." "Oh, any kind of place will suit him," answered the landlord. "He's one of those country fellows who can sleep in the haymow and eat with the horses." The traveler was soon at the door. He was dressed plainly, and with his reddish-brown hair and mud-bespattered face, looked like a hard-working countryman just in from the backwoods. "Have you a room here for me?" he asked the landlord. Now the landlord prided himself upon keeping a first-class hotel, and he feared that his guests would not like the rough-looking traveler. So he answered, "No, sir, every room is full. The only place I could put you would be in the barn." "Well, then," answered the stranger, "I will see what they can do for me at the Planters' Tavern around the corner." And he rode away. About an hour later, a well-dressed gentleman came into the hotel and said, "I wish to see Mr. Jefferson." "Mr. Jefferson?" said the landlord. "Yes, sir, Thomas Jefferson, the Vice President of the United States." "He isn't here." "Oh, but he must be. I met him as he rode into town, and he said that he intended to stop at this hotel. He's been here about an hour." "No, he hasn't. The only man who's been here for lodging today was an old clodhopper who was so spattered with mud that you couldn't see the color of his coat. I sent him round to the Planters." "Did he have reddish-brown hair, and did he ride a gray horse?" "Yes, and he was quite tall." "That was Mr. Jefferson," said the gentleman. "Mr. Jefferson!" cried the landlord. "Was that the vice president? Here, Dick, build a fire in the best room. Put everything in tip-top order, Sally. What a dunce I was for turning Mr. Jefferson away. He shall have all the rooms in the house, and the ladies' parlor too. I'll go right round to the Planters and fetch him back." So he went to the other hotel, where he found the vice president sitting with some friends in the parlor. "Mr. Jefferson," he said, "I have come to ask your pardon. You were so bespattered with mud that I thought you were some old farmer. If you'll come back to my house, you shall have the best room in it. Yes, all the rooms, if you wish. Won't you come?" "No," answered Mr. Jefferson. "A farmer is as good as any other man, and where there's no room for a farmer, there can be no room for me." End of The Landlord's Mistake by James Baldwin.
The Magic Flower by Maud Lindsay. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Magic Flower. Once upon a time there lived a wee woman whose bit of a garden was a delight to all eyes. Such flowers she had, and in the midst of them, green as an emerald and smooth as velvet, was a grass plot with never a weed upon it, and through the grass ran a garden walk as white as snow. Everyone who saw it declared there was no prettier garden in the king's country, and what they said was no more than what was true. Early and late the wee woman worked to keep her garden fair and lovely, but in spite of all her care, whenever the east wind blew, it brought with it a whirl of trash from her neighbour's dooryard and scattered it among her flowers. Alack and alas, what a dooryard was that! Except for the trash that was always upon it, it was as bare as the palm of your hand, and there was a heap of dirt and ashes as high as a hillock in front of the door. Everybody who passed it turned their eyes away from it, for there was no uglier spot in the king's country, and that is nothing but the truth of it. Whenever the wee woman looked at her windows or walked in her garden, she saw the dooryard, and many was the day when she said to herself, "I wish I were 1,000 miles away from it." And if she made up her mind, as she sometimes did, that she would trouble no more about it, the east wind was sure to come with a whirl of its trash. Oh, it seemed as if she were always cleaning because of that dooryard. And what to do about it she did not know. She puzzled and planned, she wished and she worked, but she had come to the end of her wits when, one day, her fairy godmother came to see her. "Never fret," said the godmother, when she had heard the trouble. "In your own garden grows a magic flower that can set things right, and if you will only tend it and watch it and wait long enough, you will see what you shall see." And when she had pointed out the flower, she went on her way, leaving the wee woman much comforted. She tended the flower and watched it and waited to see what she should see, and while she was watching and waiting, the flower burst into bloom, the loveliest bloom. Every blossom was as rosy as the little clouds at sunrise, and the wee woman's garden was more beautiful than before because of them. "'Tis the prettiest garden in the king's country," said everyone who passed, and what they said was no more than what was true. But as for the neighbor's dooryard, it was as bare and ugly as ever. The heap of dirt and ashes grew larger every day, and whenever the wind blew from the east, it brought a whirl of its trash into the wee woman's garden, just as it had always done. The wee woman looked each morning to see if the magic of the flower had begun to work, but morning after morning nothing changed. "It is long waiting and weary watching for magic things to work," said she to herself. But because of what her fairy godmother had told her, she tended the flower from day to day and hoped in her heart that something might come of it yet. By and by, the blossoms of the flower faded and fell, and after them came the seed. Hundreds and hundreds of feathery seed there were, and one day the wind from the west came by and blew them away in a whirl over the fence and into the neighbor's dooryard. No one saw them go, not even the wee woman knew what had become of them, and as for the dooryard, it was as ugly as ever, with its ash heap and its trash. Everybody who passed it turned their eyes away from it. The wee woman herself would look at it no longer. "I will look at the magic flowers instead," she said to herself, and so she did. Early and late she tended the plant and worked to make her garden fair and lovely, but she kept her eyes away from the dooryard, and if the wind from the east blew trash among her flowers, she raked it away and burnt it up and troubled no more about it. Summer slipped into autumn, and autumn to winter, and the flowers slept, but at the first peep of spring the wee woman's garden budded and bloomed once more, and one day as she worked there, with her back to the dooryard, she heard passers-by call out in delight, "Of all the gardens in the king's country, there are none so pretty as these two," and when she looked around in surprise to see what they meant, she saw that the neighbor's dooryard was full of flowers, hundreds and hundreds of lovely blossoms, every one as rosy as the little clouds at sunrise. They covered the heap of dirt and ashes. They clustered about the door-stone. They filled the corners, and in the midst of them was the neighbor, raking and cleaning as busily as if she were the wee woman herself. "'Tis fine weather for the flowers," she said, nodding and smiling at the wee woman. "The finest in the world," said the wee woman, and she nodded and smiled too, for she knew that the magic flower had done its work. End of The Magic Flower, read by James.
The Man Who Would Not Scold, from a Chinese Wonder Book, by Norman Hinsdale Pittman. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Dale Grothman. The Man Who Would Not Scold, by Norman Hinsdale Pittman. Old Wang lived in a village near Nanking. He cared for nothing in the world but to eat good food, and plenty of it. Now, though this Wang was by no means a poor man, it made him very sad to spend money, and so people called him in sport the Miser King, for Wang is the Chinese word for king. His greatest pleasure was to eat at someone else's table when he knew the food would cost him nothing, and you may be sure that at such times he always licked his chopsticks clean. But when he was spending his own money, he tightened his belt and drank a great deal of water, eating very little but scraps, such as his friends would have thrown to the dogs. Thus people laughed at him and said, "When Wang an invitation gets, he chews and chews until he sweats. But when his own food he must eat, the tears slow down and wet his feet." One day, while Wang was lying half asleep on the bank of a stream that flowed near his house, he began to feel hungry. He had been in that spot all day without tasting anything. At last he saw a flock of ducks swimming in the river. He knew that they belonged to a rich man named Lin, who lived in the village. They were fat ducks, so plump and tempting that it made him hungry to look at them. "Oh, for a boiled duck," he said to himself with a sigh. "Why is it that the gods have not given me the taste of duck during the past year? What have I done to be thus denied?" Then the thought flashed into his mind. Here am I asking why the gods have not given me ducks to eat. Who knows but that they have sent this flock thinking that I would have sense enough to grab one. Friend Lin, many thanks for your kindness. I think I shall accept your offer and take one of these fowls for my dinner. Of course, Mr. Lin was nowhere near to hear old Wang thank him. By this time the flock had come to shore. The miser picked himself up lazily from the ground, and, having tired himself out, he at last managed to pick one of the ducks up, too. He took it home joyfully, hiding it under his ragged garment. Once in his own yard, he lost no time in killing and preparing it for dinner. He ate it, laughing to himself all the time at his own slyness, and wondering what his friend Lin would think if he chanced to count his ducks that night. "No doubt he will believe it was a great hawk that carried off that bird," he said, chuckling. "My word, but didn't I do a great trick? I think I will repeat the dose tomorrow. The first duck is well lodged in my stomach, and I'm ready to take an oath that all the others will find a bed in that same boarding house before many weeks have passed. It would be a pity to leave the first one to pine away in lonely grief. I could never be so cruel." So old Wang went to bed happy. For several hours he snored away noisily, dreaming that a certain rich man had promised him good food for all the rest of his life, and that he would never be forced to do another stroke of work. At midnight, however, he was wakened from his sleep by an unpleasant itching. His whole body seemed to be on fire, and the pain was more than he could bear. He got up and paced the floor. There was no oil in the house for his lamp, and he had to wait until morning to see what was the matter. At early dawn he stepped outside his shanty. Lo and behold, he found little red spots all over his body. Before his very eyes he saw tiny duck feathers sprouting from these spots. As the morning went by, the feathers grew larger and larger, until his whole body was covered with them from head to foot. Only his face and hands were free from the strange growth. With a cry of horror, Wang began to pull the feathers out by handsful, flinging them in the dirt and stamping on them. "The gods have fooled me," he yelled. "They made me take the duck and eat it, and now they are punishing me for stealing." But the faster he jerked the feathers out, the faster they grew in again, longer and more glossy than before. Then, too, the pain was so great that he could scarcely keep from rolling on the ground. At last, completely worn out by his useless labor, and moaning with despair, he took to his bed. "Am I to be changed into a bird?" he groaned. "May the gods have mercy on me." He tossed about on his bed. He could not sleep. His heart was sick with fear. Finally he fell into a troubled sleep, and, sleeping, had a dream. A fairy came down to his bedside. It was Fairy Old Boy, the friend of the people. "Ah, my poor Wang," said the fairy, "all this trouble you have brought upon yourself by your shiftless, lazy habits. When others work, why do you lie down and sleep your time away? Why don't you get up and shake your lazy legs? There is no place in the world for such a man as you except the pigsty." "I know you are telling the truth," wailed Wang, "but how, oh how, can I ever work with all these feathers sticking out of me? They will kill me! They will kill me!" "Hear the man!" laughed Old Boy. "Now if you were a hopeful, happy fellow, you would say, 'What a stroke of luck! No need to buy garments. The gods have given me a suit of clothes that will never wear out. You are a pretty fellow to be complaining, aren't you?" After joking in this way for a little while, The good fairy changed his tone of voice and said, "Now, Wang, are you really sorry for the way you have lived? Sorry for your years of idleness? Sorry because you disgraced your old father and mother? I hear your parents died of hunger because you would not help them." Wang, seeing that old boy knew all about his past life, and feeling his pain growing worse and worse every minute, cried out at last, "Yes, yes, I will do anything you say. Only I pray you, free me of these feathers." "I wouldn't have your feathers," said old boy, "and I cannot free you from them. You will have to do the whole thing yourself. What you need is to hear a good scolding. Go and get Mr. Lin, the owner of the stolen duck, to scold freely. The harder he scolds, the sooner your feathers will drop out." Now, of course, some readers will laugh and say, "But this was only a silly dream, and meant nothing." Mr. Wang, however, did not think in this way. He woke up very happy. He would go to Mr. Lin, confess everything, and take the scolding. Then he would be free of his feathers and would go to work. Truly, he had led a lazy life. What the good fairy old boy had said about his father and mother had hurt him very badly, for he knew that every word was true. From this day on he would not be lazy. He would take a wife and become a father of a family. Miser Wang meant all right when he started out from his shanty. From his little hoard of money he took enough cash to pay Mr. Lin for the stolen duck. He would do everything the fairy had told him, and even more. But this doing more was just where he got into trouble. As he walked along the road jingling the string of cash and thinking that he must soon give it up to his neighbor, he grew very sad. He loved every copper of his money, and he disliked to part with it. After all, old boy had not told him he must confess to the owner of the duck. He had said he must go to Lin and get Lin to give a good scolding. "Old boy did not say that Lin must scold me," thought the miser. "All that I need to do is get him to scold, and then my feathers will drop off and I shall be happy. Why not tell him that old Sen stole his duck and get him to give Sen a scolding? That will surely do just as well, and I shall save my money as well as my face. Besides, if I tell Lin that I am a thief, perhaps he will send for the police, and they will haul me off to prison. Surely, going to jail would be as bad as wearing feathers. Ha ha! This will be a good joke on Sen, Lin, and the whole lot of them. I shall fool fairy old boy, too. Really, he had no right to speak of my father and mother in the way he did. After all, they died of fever, and I was no doctor to cure them. How could he say it was my fault?" The longer Wang talked to himself, the surer he became it was useless to tell Lin he had stolen the duck. By the time he had reached the duckman's house, he had fully made up his mind to deceive him. Mr. Lin invited him to come in and sit down. He was a plain-spoken, honest kind of man, this Lin. Everybody liked him, for he never spoke ill of any man, and he always had something good to say of his neighbors. "Well, what's your business, friend Wang? You have come out bright and early, and it's a long walk from your place to mine." "Oh, I had something important I wanted to talk to you about," began Wang slyly. "That's a fine flock of ducks you have over in the meadow." "Yes," said Mr. Lin, smiling, "a fine flock indeed." But he said nothing of the stolen fowl. "How many have you?" questioned Wang more boldly. "I counted them yesterday morning, and there were 15. "But did you count them again last night?" "Yes, I did," answered Lin slowly. "And there were only 14 then?" "Quite right, friend Wang. One of them was missing, but one duck is of little importance. Why do you speak of it?" "What? No importance? Losing a duck? How can you say so? A duck's a duck, isn't it? And surely you would like to know how you lost it." "A hawk, most likely." "No, it wasn't a hawk, but if you would go and look in old Sen's duck yard, you would likely find feathers." "Nothing more natural, I'm sure. In a duck yard?" "Yes, But your duck's feathers, persisted Wang. What? You think old Sen is a thief, do you? And that he has been stealing from me? Exactly, you have it now. Well, well, that is too bad. I am sorry the old fellow is having such a hard time. He is a good worker and deserves better luck. I should willingly have given him a duck if he had only asked for it. Too bad that he had to steal it. Wang waited to see how Mr. Lin planned to punish the thief, feeling sure that the least he could do would be to go and give him a good scolding. But nothing of the kind happened. Instead of growing angry, Mr. Lin seemed to be sorry for Sen. Sorry he was poor. Sorry that he was willing to steal. Aren't you even going to give him a scolding? Asked Wang in disgust. Better go to his house with me and give him a good raking over the coals. What use? What use? Hurt a neighbor's feeling just for a duck? That would be foolish indeed. By this time the miser king had begun to feel an itching all over his body. The feathers had begun hurting again, and he was frightened once more. He became excited and threw himself on the floor in front of Mr. Lin. Hey, what's the matter, man? Cried Lin, thinking Wang was in a fit. What's the matter? Are you ill? Yes, very ill, wailed Wang. Mr. Lin, I am a bad man, and I may as well own it at once and be done with it. There is no use trying to dodge the truth or hide the fault. I stole your duck last night, and today I came sneaking over here and tried to put the thing off on old Sen. Yes, I knew it, answered Lin. I saw you carrying the duck off under your garment. Why did you come to see me at all, if you thought I did not know your guilt? Only wait, and I'll tell you everything, said Wang, bowing still lower. After I had boiled your duck and eaten it, I went to bed. Pretty soon I felt an itching all over my body. I could not sleep, and in the morning I found I had a thick growth of duck's feathers from head to foot. The more I pulled them out, the thicker they grew in. I could hardly keep from screaming. I took to my bed, and after I had tossed about for hours, a fairy came and told me that I could never get rid of my troubles unless I got you to give me a thorough scolding. Here is the money for your duck. Now, for the love of mercy, scold, and do it quickly, for I can't stand the pain much longer. Wang was groveling in the dirt at Lin's feet, but Lin answered him only with a loud laugh, which burst into a roar. Duck feathers! Ha, ha, ha! And all over your body! Why, that's too good a story to believe. You'll be wanting to live in the water next. Ha, ha, ha! Scold me, begged Wang. For the love of the gods, scold me. But Lin only laughed louder. Pray, let me see this wonderful growth of feathers first, and then we'll talk about the scolding. Wang willingly opened his garment and showed the doubting Lin that he had been really speaking the truth. They must be warm, said Lin, laughing. Winter is soon coming, and you are not over fond of work. Won't they save you the trouble of wearing clothes? But they make me itch so I can scarcely stand it. I feel like screaming out, the pain is so great. And again Wang got down and began to kowtow to the other. That is, he knelt and bumped his forehead against the ground. Be calm, my friend, and give me time to think of some good scold words, said Lin at last. I am not in the habit of using strong language, and very seldom lose my temper. Really, you must give me time to think of what to say. By this time, Wang was in such pain that he lost all power over himself. He seized Lin by the legs, crying out, Scold me! Scold me! Mr. Lin was now out of patience with his visitor. Besides, Wang was holding him so tightly that it really felt as if Lin were being pinched by some giant crawfish. Suddenly Lin could hold his tongue no longer. You lazy hound! You whelp! You turtle! You lazy good-for-nothing creature! I wish you would hurry up and roll out of this. Now in China this is very strong language, and with a cry of joy Wang leapt up from the ground, for he knew that Lin had scolded him. No sooner had the first hasty words been spoken than the feathers began to fall from the lazy man's body, and at last the dreadful itching had entirely stopped. On the floor in front of Lin lay a giant pile of feathers, and Wang, freed from his trouble, pointed to them and said, "Thank you kindly, my dear friend, for the pretty names you have called me. You have saved my life, and although I have paid for the duck, I wish to add to the bargain by making you a present of these handsome feathers. They will, in a measure, repay you for your splendid set of scold words. I have learned my lesson well, I hope, and I shall go out of here a better man. Fairy Old Boy told me that I was lazy. You agreed with the fairy. From this day, however, you shall see that I can bend my back like a good fellow. Goodbye, and many thanks for your kindness." So saying, with many low bows and polite words, Wang left the duck owner's house, a happier and wiser man. The End of The Man Who Would Not Scold, by Norman Hinsdale Pittman.
The Story of the New Year, by Agnes Taylor Ketchum and Ida M. Jorgensen. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. It was the 1st of January, and a terrible fall of snow was pelting down and whirling through the streets and lanes. The roofs of the houses were covered with large white masses, and it lay in white heaps on the window sills. Everybody seemed to be in a great hurry. They ran, jostled against each other, fell into each other's arms, holding fast for a moment, as long as they could stand safely. Coaches and horses looked as if they had been frosted with sugar. The footmen stood with their backs against the carriages so as to turn their faces from the wind. Everybody looked cold, and everybody was cold. But at last the storm abated, and a narrow path was soon swept clean in front of the houses, and when two persons met in this path, both would stand still, for neither liked to step aside in the deep snow. There they would stand for a few minutes, and then, as if by tacit consent, they each sacrificed a leg and buried it in the deep snow, and passed on. Soon troops of children were seen to issue from the doorways, all muffled up in warm cloaks and furs, dragging their sleds after them, and so joyous and happy it made one feel warm to look at them. Towards evening the wind ceased to blow, the sky looked so lofty and transparent, while the stars shone with new brightness and purity. The frozen snow crackled underfoot, and was quite firm enough to bear the sparrows, who hopped upon it in the morning dawn. They searched for food in the paths which had been swept, but there was little food to be found, and they were terribly cold. "Tweet, tweet," said one cold little fellow to another. "They call this New Year, but I think it worse than the old one. We might just as well have kept the old year. I am quite unhappy, and have a right to be so." "Yes, you have, and yet the people ran about and fired off guns, shouted and rang bells to usher in the New Year," said a little shivering sparrow. "They threw things against the doors, and were quite beside themselves with joy, because the old year had disappeared. I was glad, too, because I supposed the warm weather, or at least warm days, would come, but my hopes have come to nothing. It freezes harder than ever. I think mankind have made a big mistake in reckoning time." "That they have," said an old, wise-looking sparrow with a white topknot. "They have something they call a calendar. It's an invention of their own, and everything must be arranged according to it. But it won't do. When spring comes, then the year begins. It's the voice of nature, and I reckon by that." "But when will spring come?" asked they all. "It will come when the stork returns. But he is very uncertain, and seldom visits the city, so the people here know nothing about it. In the country they have more knowledge. Shall we fly away there and wait? We shall be nearer to spring, certainly." "That may be all very well," said another sparrow, who had been hopping about for a long time chirping, but not saying anything of consequence. "But I have found a few comforts here in town which I'm afraid I would miss out in the country. Here in this neighborhood lives a good, kind family, who has been so sensible as to place 2 or 3 flower pots against the wall in the courtyard, so that the openings are all turned inward, and the bottom of each points outward. In the latter a hole has been cut, large enough for me to fly in and out. I and my husband have built a nest in one of these pots, and all our little ones, who have now flown away, were brought up in there. The good people, of course, made the whole arrangement that they might have the pleasure of seeing us and taking care of us. It seems to please the little children very much to strew breadcrumbs for us, and so we have food, and ought to be very thankful, and consider ourselves well provided for. So I think we will stay where we are, even if spring does come sooner in the country, said the old sparrow, and the other sparrows spread their wings and flew away to the country. Now, the little sparrows had never been in the country except in the summer, and they supposed the fields were always green, the sun always shining, and the clear brooks running full of water. And great was their surprise and disappointment to find it even colder by a few degrees than in town. The sharp winds blew over the snow-covered fields. The farmer, wrapped in warm clothing, sat in his sleigh and beat his arms across his chest to keep off the cold. The horses ran till they smoked, and frightened the poor little sparrows as they sat dolefully on the top rail of the fence. Then they hopped down into the wheel ruts, hoping to find something to eat, and shivered, crying, "Tweet, tweet, when will spring come?" It is very long coming. Very long indeed sounded over the field from the nearest snow-covered hill, and the little sparrows hopped onto the fence-rail and looked over towards the hill to see who it was that had spoken. And there sat a wonderful old man, up high on a heap of snow, regardless of wind and weather. He had a pale face, large clear blue eyes, and long white hair, which the wind played hide-and-seek with, and he was dressed in icicles. "Who can that old man be?" asked the sparrows of an old raven, who also sat on a fence near them. "Why, that is Old Winter, the old man of last year. He is not dead yet, as the calendar says, but acts as guardian to the little Prince Spring, who is coming after a while. Winter rules here still, and he makes you fairly shiver, little ones, does he not?" "There, did I not tell you so?" said the white top-knot sparrow. "The calendar is only an invention of man's, and they know nothing about nature. They ought to have asked some of the birds, as they know all about such things." And down he hopped into the ruts again, saying, "Tweet, tweet." The poor little sparrows waited 1 week, then another, and thought they would surely freeze before spring would come. The forests looked dark, the lake was frozen till it looked like one sheet of lead, and over the land hung damp, icy mists. Large black crows flew about in silence. It was as if all nature slept. At length a sunbeam glided over the lake, and it shone like burnished gold. The white form of Old Winter sat there still, but the sun began to shine, and danced and sparkled over his dress of icicles, until it finally disappeared. Patches of green grass appeared here and there, and these were soon covered with sparrows, saying, "Tee-wit, tee-wit, is spring coming at last?" Spring! How the cry resounded over field and meadow, and through the dark brown woods, where the fresh green moss gleams on the trunk of the trees, and from the south came the first 2 storks, flying through the air, and on the back of each sat a lovely little child. They greeted the earth with a kiss, and wherever they placed their feet, white flowers sprung up through the snow. Hand in hand, the 2 golden-haired children approached Old Winter, embraced him, and clung to his breast, and as they did so, they were enveloped in a deep mist, dark and heavy, that closed over them a veil. The wind arose with a mighty rustling, and cleared the mist away. Then the sun shone out warmly. Winter had vanished, and the 2 beautiful children of spring sat on the throne of the year. "This is really a new year," cried the sparrows. "Now we shall be happy and warm once more." End of The Story of the New Year by Agnes Taylor Ketchum and Ida M. Jorgensen.
The Peacock Butterflies by Abby Phillips Walker. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Plain little Miss Butterfly sat in a bush one day, when along came Mr. Peacock, with his tail full spread. "Oh, oh," sighed little Miss Butterfly. "How handsome he is! If only I could have a dress like the color of Mr. Peacock's tail, all the other butterflies in the world would envy me. But here am I, only a plain little creature with no color to boast of, while all my cousins have gorgeously colored gowns. Oh, how I do wish he would give me 2 feathers from his tail, that I might have them made into a gown." And then this plain little butterfly, because she was so plain and had no beauty to speak about, began to think about handsome Mr. Peacock. "I wonder if he is vain," she said out loud. "Vain? Of course he is. There is no one in the world so vain as he," said a bee who was sipping honey nearby. Miss Butterfly did not ask any questions, and Mr. Bee was too busy to say more. But when he flew away, Miss Butterfly began to think, and the more she thought, the stronger became her intention to fly over to the peacock and speak to him. Over she went, alighting on a flower near him. "Mr. Peacock," she said, "I wonder you have never wished to see yourself. You are so handsome." "I have," said Mr. Peacock. "Often I have gazed into the pond and beheld my handsome self." "Oh, that is not at all what I mean," said Miss Butterfly. "Suppose you were to see the very pattern of your beautiful tail flying all about you. Then you can look at your beauty as it really is." "I do not see at all what you mean," said Mr. Peacock, who was not very quick at thinking. "I mean, if you would give me 2 tips from your beautiful tail, I could have a handsomer gown than any other butterfly in the world," said the little flatterer. "And besides that, you would no longer hear the yellow and the black, and those brown and black butterflies say that they were the handsomest creatures in the garden. I should outshine them all." Mr. Peacock stood up and strutted about, and all the time little Miss Butterfly flew close to him and flattered him. "Oh, how jealous they would be if I had a dress like your beautiful tail, for there are no colors in the world so gorgeous, and they would call me the Peacock Butterfly. Think of that! You would have the most beautiful butterfly in the world named for you, Mr. Peacock." Mr. Peacock could not resist his flattery. He told her she could choose the 2 tips she best liked and have someone to pull them out. It did not take Miss Butterfly a minute to fly to the tree nearby, where Mr. Woodpecker was at work, and ask his help, for she knew he did not bother butterflies. His work was to find small insects. Before the end of the summer, the garden folks saw Miss Butterfly, but not plain little Butterfly now, for she wore the most gorgeous gown in the garden of blue and black. And the next year all the other butterflies were jealous of the Peacock Butterflies, who wore the handsomest gowns in the world. Mr. Peacock struts more than ever every time he sees one of the handsome creatures he helped to dress. But no one knows that this was due to the flattery of plain little Miss Butterfly that the family name was created. End of The Peacock Butterflies by Abby Phillips Walker.
The Tale of Peter Rabbit. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are within the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by George Gall. The Tale of Peter Rabbit by Beatrix Potter. Once upon a time, there were 4 little rabbits, and their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. They lived with their mother in a sandbank underneath the root of a very big fir tree. "Now, my dears," said Mrs. Rabbit one morning, "you may go into the fields or down the lane, but don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there. He was put into a pie by Mrs. McGregor. Now run along, and don't get in mischief. I'm going out." Then old Mrs. Rabbit took a basket and her umbrella, and went through the woods to the baker's. She bought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns. Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, who were good little bunnies, went down the lane to gather blackberries. But Peter, who was very naughty, ran straight away to Mr. McGregor's garden and squeezed under the gate. First, he ate some lettuces and some French beans, and then he ate some radishes. And then, feeling rather sick, he went to look for some pursleys. But around the end of a cucumber frame, whom shall he meet but Mr. McGregor? Mr. McGregor was on his hands and knees, planting out young cabbages, but he jumped up and ran up to Peter, waving like a rake and calling out, "Stop, thief!" Peter was most dreadfully frightened. He rushed all over the garden, for he had forgotten the way back to the gate. He lost one of his shoes among the cabbages, and the other one among the potatoes. After losing them, he ran on 4 legs and went faster, so that I think he might have got away altogether if he had not unfortunately run into a gooseberry net and got caught by the large button on his jacket. It was a blue jacket with brass buttons, quite new. Peter gave himself up for lost and shed big tears. But his sobs were overheard by some friendly sparrows, who flew to him with great excitement and implored him to exert himself. Mr. McGregor came up with a sieve, which he intended to pop upon the top of Peter, but Peter wiggled out just in time, leaving his jacket behind, and rushed into the tool shed and jumped into a can. It would have been a beautiful thing to hide in if it had not had so much water inside. Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps hidden under a flower pot. He began to turn them over carefully, looking under each. Presently, Peter sneezed. "Kutschko!" Mr. McGregor was after him in no time, and tried to put out his foot upon Peter, who jumped out a window, upsetting 3 plants. The window was too small for Mr. McGregor, and he was tired of running after Peter. He went back to his work. Peter sat down to rest. He was out of breath and trembling with fright. He had not the least idea which way to go. Also, he was very damped with sitting in that can. After a time, he began to wander about, going lippity-lippity, not very fast, and looking around. He found a door in the wall, but it was locked, and there was no room for a fat little rabbit to squeeze underneath. An old mouse was running in and out over the stone doorstep, carrying peas and beans to her family in the woods. Peter asked her the way to the gate, but she had such a large pea in her mouth that she could not answer. She only shook her head at him. Peter began to cry. Then he tried to find his way straight across the garden, but he became more and more puzzled. Presently, he came to a pond where Mr. McGregor filled his water cans. A white cat was staring at some goldfish. She sat very, very still, but now and then the tip of her tail twitched as if it were alive. Peter thought it best to go away without speaking to her. He had heard about cats from his cousin, little Benjamin Bunny. Quite close to him, he heard the noise of a hoe screeching, scratching, screeching, scratching. Peter scattered underneath the bushes, but presently, as nothing happened, he came out and climbed upon a wheelbarrow and peed out. The first thing he saw was Mr. McGregor hoeing onions. His back was turned towards Peter, and beyond him was the gate. Peter got down very quietly off the wheelbarrow and started running as fast as he could along a straight walk behind some blackcurrant bushes. Mr. McGregor caught sight of him at the corner, but Peter did not care. He slipped underneath the gate and was safe at last in the woods outside the garden. Mr. McGregor hung up the little jacket and the shoes for a scarecrow to frighten the blackbirds. Peter never stopped running or looked behind him till he got home to the big fir tree. He was so tired that he flopped down upon the nice soft sand on the floor of the rabbit hole and shut his eyes. His mother was busy cooking. She wondered what had he done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and a pair of shoes that Peter had lost in a fortnight. I'm very sorry to say Peter was not very well during the evening. His mother put him to bed and made some camomile tea, and she gave him a dose of it to Peter. A tablespoonful to be taken at bedtime. But Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail had bread and milk and blackberries for supper. End of the Tale of Peter Rabbit by Beatrix Potter. Recording by George Gao, Beijing, China.
The Tiger, the Brahman, and the Jackal. From the Fairy Tales, selected and edited by Joseph Jacobs, illustrated by John D. Batten. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by J.K. The Tiger, the Brahman, and the Jackal. Once upon a time, a tiger was caught in a trap. He tried in vain to get out through the bars, and rolled and bit with rage and grief when he failed. By chance a poor Brahman came by.
"Let me out of this cage, O pious one,"
cried the tiger. "Nay, my friend," replied the Brahman mildly, "you would probably eat me if I did."
"Not at all,"
swore the tiger with many oaths.
"On the contrary, I should be forever grateful, and serve you as a slave."
Now when the tiger sobbed and sighed and wept and swore, the pious Brahman's heart softened, and at last he consented to open the door of the cage. Out popped the tiger, and seizing the poor man, cried,
"What a fool you are! What is to prevent my eating you now? For, after being cooped up so long, I'm terribly hungry."
In vain the Brahman pleaded for his life. The most he could gain was a promise to abide by the decision of the first three things he chose to question as to the justice of the tiger's action. So the Brahman first asked a peepal tree what it thought of the matter, but the peepal tree replied coldly, "What have you to complain about? Don't I give shade and shelter to everyone who passes by? And don't they in return tear down my branches to feed their cattle? Don't whimper, be a man." Then the Brahman, sad at heart, went further afield till he saw a buffalo turning a well wheel, but he fared no better from it, for it answered,
"You are a fool to expect gratitude. Look at me. Whilst I gave milk, they fed me on cotton seed and oil cake. But now I am dry, and they yoke me here, and give me refuse as fodder."
The Brahman, still more sad, asked the road to give him its opinion. "My dear sir," said the road, "how foolish you are to expect anything else. Here am I, useful to everybody, yet all, rich and poor, great and small, trample on me as they go past, giving me nothing but the ashes of their pipes and the husks of their grain." On this the Brahman turned back sorrowfully, and on the way he met a Jackal, who called out, "Why, what's the matter, Mr. Brahman? You look as miserable as a fish out of water." The Brahman told him all that had occurred. "How very confusing," said the Jackal, when the recital was ended. "Would you mind telling me over again? For everything has got so mixed up." The Brahman told it all over again, but the Jackal shook his head in a distracted sort of way, and still could not understand. "It's very odd," said he sadly, "but it all seems to go in at one ear and out at the other. I will go to the place where it all happened, and then perhaps I shall be able to give a judgment." So they returned to the cage, by which the tiger was waiting for the Brahman and sharpening his teeth and claws.
"You've been away a long time,"
growled the savage beast.
"But now let's begin our dinner."
"Our dinner?" thought the wretched Brahman, as his knees knocked together with fright. What a remarkably delicate way of putting it. "Give me 5 minutes, my lord," he pleaded, "in order that I may explain matters to the Jackal here, who is somewhat slow in his wits." The tiger consented, and the Brahman began the whole story over again, not missing a single detail, and spinning as long a yarn as possible. "Oh, my poor brain! Oh, my poor brain!" cried the Jackal, wringing its paws. "Let me see. How did it all begin? You were in the cage, and the tiger came walking by."
"Pooh!" said the tiger. "What a fool you are! I was in the cage."
"Of course!" cried the Jackal, pretending to tremble with fright. "Yes, I was in the cage." "No, I wasn't." "Dear, dear, where are my wits? Let me see. The tiger was in the Brahman, and the cage came walking by. No, that's not it either. Well, don't mind me, but begin your dinner, for I shall never understand."
"Yes, you shall,"
returned the tiger, in a rage at the Jackal's stupidity.
"I'll make you understand. Look here, I am the tiger."
"Yes, my lord,"
And that is the Brahman.
Yes, my lord.
And that is the cage.
Yes, my lord.
And I was in the cage. Do you understand?
Yes, no, please, my lord.
Well?
Cried the tiger impatiently. Please, my lord, how did you get in?
How? Why, in the usual way, of course.
Oh, dear me, my head is beginning to whirl again. Please don't be angry, my lord, but what is the usual way? At this the tiger lost patience, and jumping into the cage, he cried,
This way. Now, do you understand how it was?
Perfectly, grinned the jackal, as he dexterously shut the door. And if you will permit me to say so, I think matters will remain as they were. End of The Tiger, the Brahman and the Jackal, from the Fairy Tales, selected and edited by Joseph Jacobs, illustrated by John D. Batten. Recording by J.K.
Which was the king? From 50 Famous People, a book of short stories by James Baldwin. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Dale Grothman. Which was the king? By James Baldwin. One day, King Henry IV of France was hunting in a large forest. Towards evening, he told his men to ride home by the main road, while he went another way that was somewhat longer. As he came out of the forest, he saw a little boy by the roadside, who seemed to be watching for someone. "Well, my boy," said the king, "are you looking for your father?" "No, sir," answered the boy. "I'm looking for the king. They say he is hunting in the woods, and perhaps will ride out this way. So I'm waiting to see him." "Oh, if that's what you wish," said King Henry, "get up behind me on the horse, and I'll take you to the place where you will see him." The boy got up at once, and sat behind the king. The horse cantered briskly along, and the king and the boy were soon quite well acquainted. "They say that King Henry always has a number of men with him," said the boy. "How shall I know which is he?" "Oh, that will be easy enough," was the answer. "All the other men will take off their hats, but the king will keep his on." "Do you mean that the one with his hat on will be the king?" "Certainly." Soon they came into the main road, where a number of the king's men were waiting. All the men seemed amused when they saw the boy, and as they rode up, they greeted the king by taking off their hats. "Well, my boy," said King Henry, "which do you think is the king?" "I don't know," answered the boy, "but it must be either you or I, for we both have our hats on." End of Which Was the King by James Baldwin.